Bino. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm executive director at Peace Action New York State. I'll be moderating tonight's teach-in, and I'm really glad to be here with all of you on today's traditional tax day. As we all know, tax day this year has actually been postponed, so we have 2 tax days, the second being May 17th, and I know there's some great in-person events happening for that, but I think around this time of year, around tax day, it's a really good moment to pause and take a minute to think about where our taxes are going, what they're funding, and what this means about our priorities. I think especially in light of this past year and going through a pandemic and seeing what our tax dollars really did not prepare us for as a nation. So we've got a really wonderful lineup of speakers. I know Representative Ayanna Pressley is hoping to join us, so please be flexible with us as we try to accommodate her. I understand she's going to be calling in between votes, so we might have to be very flexible with that, but we've got Deborah Weinstein joining us, who's Executive Director of the Coalition on Human Needs, Lindsay Koshgarian, who's Program Director of the National Priorities Project, Alan Palm, who's Director of 350 Mass Organizing's Better Future Project, Jonathan King, who's Professor of Molecular Biology Emeritus at MIT and also co-chair of the Board of Massachusetts Peace Action. And then I know we've got a wonderful video from Shali Gupta Barnes, who's Program Director of the Cairo Center and co-author of the Moral Budget of the Poor People's Campaign. So a really wonderful program packed for all of you tonight. As you have questions, please feel free to use the chat and put them there. We will have time for Q&A at the end. And yeah, really looking forward to getting started and being part of this discussion on funding priorities and taxes and trying to figure out what we can do to have our funds better align with our priorities. I am waiting for confirmation that we've got all our speakers. I know we have most of them. We're hoping to start off with Representative Pressley, who will hopefully be joining in a minute.
We got all but Rep. Pressley, I think.
Okay, great. So do you think we should just kick it off then, Cole?
Yeah.
Cool. Great, then I would love to pass it to Debbie Weinstein, who I just mentioned is Executive Director of the Coalition on Human Needs. So welcome, Debbie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me. Let's see, is it possible for me to share my screen? Would that work?
Yes.
Okay, here, give me a second here. And, oops. Some of this doesn't show in order for me to.
We see it.
We see it. Okay. I was trying to do show it a little larger, but this will work. Anyway, thanks very much. I wanted to talk to set the stage a bit for the historic but temporary increases and wonderful changes that have occurred through the American Rescue Plan. And so trying to get, okay, here we go. So one of the major aspects of the plan is that it cuts child poverty in half in 2021. Those improvements are temporary. We don't want to just cut child poverty for a year and then have everybody go back to being poor. So just bear in mind how important it is that we, now that we've gotten this, that we keep it. But this gives you the sense more than half overall, with very substantial increases across racial lines. So it's a major achievement. Among the things that happen in the American Rescue Plan, you're aware of the economic impact payments, those stimulus checks of $1,400, the enhanced unemployment aid, $300 a week, in addition to basic unemployment income through September 6th. We would have liked it to go longer, but we live to fight another day. The child tax credit, as I mentioned, is responsible for really most of that improvement in terms of poverty, dramatic improvement. That's increased. And it goes for children through the age of 17, used to be only through age of 16, and it's available for all children. You can't be too poor to qualify for the child tax credit, which used to be the case. The earned income tax credit for low-income workers without dependent children nearly tripled. And there's even a special fund of $1 billion called the Pandemic Emergency Assistance, which is particularly important because it is one of the few things that can be made available to people who are undocumented. Food aid, dramatic increase in SNAP benefits extended through September, another one that we need to keep that in order to get more adequate benefits to people. Important, if you remember from the Trump administration, so unjust in its treatment of Puerto Rico and other territories. The food aid is extended to territories. There's also an increase in WIC benefits for young children and pregnant women, more aid to school children and other emergency food aid, housing, home energy, utility assistance greatly increased. We know there's been a moratorium on evictions, not 100% effective, but certainly has been helping. But without rental assistance, people will at some point be forced with homelessness, and we have to fix that. So this does provide some very important rental assistance, aid to people who are already homeless, and increases the amount to help people pay for heat and utilities, which is extremely important. Big arrearages are happening there. And for the first time, there's money for people who are overdue in their water bills to prevent shutoffs, all of that through September 30th. There's a lot of help in healthcare, lowers the premiums for individuals getting coverage through the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, fully covers the cost if you become unemployed and had health insurance. The COBRA coverage that in the past people had to pay for, and if you're unemployed, pretty hard to do that, that is fully covered. Again, temporary. Medicaid, a higher federal match to encourage the states that right now still have not expanded their Medicaid program. And we have heard that states, including Alabama, are seriously considering joining and expanding their Medicaid programs because of that. And also very important, the federal match for home care for aging and people with disabilities. That's expanded to encourage states to do that. There's a lot more public health outreach workers, and of course the vaccine distribution that you hear about all the time. There's more state and local aid. I don't want to go too long on this, so more money for childcare. But just to basically finish up, as I started with, temporary is, there are historic levels of assistance. We fought hard to get it, and now we have to keep it. In Biden's American Jobs Plan, there is an expansive definition of infrastructure, that's very important. And we have to fight for that broader definition. Yes, okay, roads, bridges, public transit, but also funding to improve on racial equity in neighborhoods, correct for some of the wrongs that had been done in the past. Recognizing, of course, fix problems like drinking water, lack of safety, like in Flint and so many communities, expand broadband, upgrading public school facilities, a lot for housing, and a very, very important part, care work, helping people to be able to stay at home when they're aging and with disabilities. $400 billion through Medicaid for that. Another historic important gain that we've got to fight for. This is something that he's proposed that we've now got to get passed, as well as job training. And it is paid for, a great deal of it, by corporate revenue increases. Coming soon, something called the American Families Plan. It's not out yet. That will include things like extending the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. We're not sure exactly what else is in there. We assume more child care assistance, health coverage. We sure hope paid leave and more housing assistance. So that's a race through both what we've won and what we still have to win. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Deborah. That was very informative and very thorough. So I really appreciate you taking the time to put that presentation together. As a reminder to everyone in the chat, we'll have Q&A at the end. So if you have questions that you're already starting to think of for Debbie, make sure to keep them in mind. I think we are still waiting for Representative Presley. So I'm glad I didn't have to interrupt Deborah in the middle of her presentation to say hello. But perhaps we should move on to our next speaker. I'm getting some nods, so that seems like a good idea. So I'd like to pass it over to Lindsay Koshgarian next to talk a little bit about the Pentagon budget.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to all of the people who are here. That was a great overview by Debbie Weinstein. I always like to hear her talk, and it's also great to hear some good news. For once, we're not really used to that yet, but but it's very refreshing. Unfortunately, I'm here to deliver the bad news. And so I'm going to share some slides as well, I hope. Just going to take me a couple of clicks.
Actually, Lindsay, can you hold on 1 second? Sure. I think we have Representative Presley joining us now. So let's take a second here. Representative Presley, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Great. It is such an honor to hear you, meet you. My name is Emily Rubino. I'm Director of Policy and Outreach I'm Executive Director of Peace Action New York State. Really happy to be moderating tonight's panel. It's a new title change, as you can tell. But I'm so glad that we can be welcoming you tonight.
Well, absolutely. I'm happy to be with you as well. Would you like for me to just get into it? I'm sorry, I'm in between votes, and I hope that you all can hear me, but because I'm on the House floor, I have to keep a mask on. That's also why I don't have my camera on. I had hoped to be able to be in virtual community with all of you, but we're in a very long voting series, and so for that, I apologize. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Yes.
And really appreciate that you're able to join us between the votes and all of the work that you're doing. I know you're one of our champions, really working for racial justice and economic justice and peace and you have so many wonderful proposed bills. So if you'd like to just get right into it, I want to make sure we're respectful of your time.
No, I certainly will. But before I do that, because I don't know how to be anybody else but me, I just need to hold space for the most recent police-involved shooting of Adam Toledo, while we're also holding space for Dante Wright and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and countless others. And I think it only befitting as I come to sit at this virtual table with mass peace action, that we hold space for the many cycles of violence and trauma that continue to be perpetuated within communities, our country, and globally. It is good to be with you. I want to offer a heartfelt gratitude to my friend Cole Harrison and the Mass Peace family at large for the work you do daily. You know, you have been on the front lines of organizing and mobilizing and advocating for a truly more just, equitable, and peaceful world. And I think you've done that with a racial lens as well, which I certainly appreciate. And as I told you the last time we were all physically together, you were all members of the squad, because the squad is anyone doing the work of building a more equitable and just world. I'm really grateful for your ongoing partnership. The past year has certainly been a difficult one for our families and our communities, but we have pulled each other through. I also see my friend Jonathan King here, who held one of the first house parties for me, and has done that for so many. So I'll get in trouble if I start naming names, but I didn't want to not acknowledge the King family. That home is hallowed ground, and has brought many of us together in community and doing the work of seeking justice. So it's good to see you. But look, this has been a year of unprecedented hurt, and we have pulled one another through. We have done that through acts of caretaking and mutual aid. And I know that all of you speak my language, my love language, which is policy, because you know that policy is personal, and that what happens in Washington has a profound impact on our ability both to live and to thrive. Now, each tax day, and I was with you all, I think that was just last year, it's hard to keep up, we gather to affirm that our federal budget is a statement of our values, and we come together to fight for budgets and policies which center the humanity and the dignity of all people. Earlier this year, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan, and while our work is far from done, I'll tell you, I am very encouraged that we are embracing this governing moment, standing in our power, and proving that in America, we can do bold, necessary, progressive, and structural things. And might I also add, because of the good movement building work done by people like Lindsay and Deborah and Alan and Emily, many of these ideas that they tried to marginalize are actually popular. So that is a testament to the power of movement building. So what I affirm in this moment is that it is possible to write budgets that value Black lives. It is possible to defund endless wars and to fund our schools. It is possible to write a tax code that values our caregivers. It is possible to tax the rich and to invest in our communities. If it feels uncomfortable, it's because we've never done it before. We are at a real inflection point in this nation. And it is a credit, again, to generations of organizing in the face of deep harm and adversity. As my sister, co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Project, Latasha Brown, who was one of those Black women on the front lines delivering Georgia twice, reminds us that organized power is realized power. And so in this moment, we are at an inflection point, and we have the power because of the power of the movement, a movement that met the moment. And now it's time for government to be responsive to the demands of that movement that is multiracial and multi-generational and issues-based activists, the most marginalized of Black and brown and low income and AAPI, indigenous, disabled, young, LGBTQ people came together, met the moment, and made it possible for democracy to breathe another day. And in this moment, I believe we're actually acting like it. What is the point of having the muscle if you don't flex it? What is the point of being in power if you don't legislate like it, if you don't lead like it? So for starters, I think it's long past time for a federal job guarantee. This year, I rolled out a resolution which builds on the work of civil rights and economic justice leaders, calling to make good on a long unfulfilled promise, a legal right to a decent, union, fair wage job for every person who calls this country home. And my federal job guarantee goes far beyond roads and bridges and calls on us to salary the critical caregiving roles in our society. These are essential to our communities. Caregiving is infrastructure, by the way, but it has too often been uncompensated and underappreciated. So right now, you know, some right now seem caught up in what is and isn't infrastructure. In partnership with you all, I'm clear on my mission and my purpose. I'm responsive to the needs of, and I'm actively listening to those closest to the pain. And we have got to take on a once in a generation infrastructure package. In order to do that effectively, we have got to go big. This is not the time to moderate, to scale back. We have to meet the scale and scope of the challenges our communities face, and we have to invest in our people. And we can't be limited by empty talking points about austerity. Austerity is violence. Now, it's funny how Republicans never ask how we pay for the endless wars we wage around the globe. No one offers a refrain about austerity in good faith. We can invest $1 billion the last 2 decades to grow our school police force to 46,000 strong, but every child doesn't have equitable access to a school nurse, a social worker, or a guidance counselor. So, you know, I'll tell you how we pay for these things. I'll tell you how we pay to take care of our people and strengthen our communities. We make the ultra wealthy corporations pay their fair share. They rely on our works, our roads, our bridges, our caregivers, and it's long past time that they chip in. Now, in a pandemic where families have struggled to afford diapers and put food on the table, billionaires have only, I can't even believe that's a word that exists, but billionaires have only gotten richer. Not only is that unjust, but it doesn't have to be that way. Another world is possible. We can chart a different path forward. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to apply pressure and bring about fundamental change to reduce the racial wealth gap, to end poverty, and to get us on track for a more equitable future. When the history books are written, people will ask us, what did we do to help the country recover from a pandemic and to reverse these longstanding injustices? Now, together, if we remain focused on the work, I hope that they will say, when history is recorded, that we met the moment. So I thank you all for what you do in community each and every day. It is my honor to not only represent many of you in Congress, but to stand shoulder to shoulder to you in solidarity and doing the work of ushering in peace in a transformative and sustainable way. And I just thank you for what you do day in and day out. And thank you for being nimble and for the accommodation of allowing me to do this right off of the House floor. I hope the next time I will at least be able to be on camera unmasked. And I look forward to when we can all physically be in community together once again Thank each and every one of you for being a source of strength and inspiration. Thank you for being my partners. Thank you for holding me accountable. Thank you for being activists, agitators, disruptors, justice, and peace seekers. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Great.
Representative.
Thank you so much, Representative Presley. Just really powerful words, and looking forward to hopefully getting to see you next time. But thank you so much for joining us and for all of your work and your leadership. And I know I feel really honored to be able, I'm not even in Massachusetts, I'm in New York, but I feel really honored to be able to work alongside you and so many of your colleagues. We need us fighting on both ends. So just really, really honored and in awe to get to share this space with you.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna let me just for 1 second, let me come on because I want to see everybody. Wait, can you all see me? Hold on. Before I have to go to this next vote. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay.
Loving
So
the scarf.
You guys are governing with me. I'm in the cloakroom right now. Okay. Appreciate
love it.
you all so much. Take care.
Thank you so much. Wow. That was so incredible and energizing. I'm so sorry, Lindsay, that we had to interrupt you, but I'm glad you hadn't jumped into your presentation yet. And so glad that Representative Presley was able to join us. Great. I think maybe we should continue on if you're ready, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Of course, an impossible act to follow. I almost feel like we should just leave it here and we're all feeling energized and ready to go and just go out and do it. But I guess we have an evening plan, so we'll continue with that. And I'm going to go back to where I was. I, of course, love Representative Presley talking about this is how we need to pay for things. All right, are you seeing my slides? Yes, okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the Pentagon budget, and of course this is hosted by Massachusetts Peace Action, so a lot of you probably are going to be familiar with some of what I'm going to say, or a lot of what
other groups, not just Mass Peace Action. Sorry
yeah,
to interrupt.
right. Yeah, okay. A lot of you here are I know I see some familiar names and faces affiliated with Mass Peace Action, but hopefully there will be some new material for everybody. And of course, the first thing I want to say is just that the Pentagon budget, of course, represents our wars in other places. It represents our use of violence as a solution, and it represents suffering for people all around the world. But it also represents a failure to recognize the real solutions to our most serious problems. And part of building back better, if that's what we want to do, needs to be to spend less on the Pentagon and less on militarization and more on human needs. So we are doing okay with the second part of that. We're beginning to spend more on human needs, although as Debbie talked about, there's a lot more that we need to do. But unfortunately, last Friday, the Biden administration released their budget request, and it included an increase for the Pentagon. This is a pattern that we're quite used to over the last 4 years. We've seen it every year, but we hoped for something better this year. So just to sort of revisit the past very briefly, this was the Trump budget request last year. And so we're just, for folks who may not be familiar with the entire process, the presidential budget request is not the budget. So this didn't become a reality, but this is what the president proposed last year. And this is just a very simple, it shows a pie chart of discretionary spending, which is the portion of the federal budget that doesn't include things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, but it's the majority of everything else. So everything from housing to public education is all in this part of the budget. And as you can see, last year, at just about this time, a little earlier, President Trump proposed that that budget should be 55% military and only 45% everything else. Now, this is where we actually ended up for, this is actually fiscal year 2020, but it hasn't changed dramatically. So we've ended up at about 53% military, and that is where the United States has been stuck for a very long time, at just over 50% of the discretionary budget going to the military. And just to show you what else that includes, instead of just non-military, this chart has all of the other things. So you see housing and veterans benefits and healthcare, not including Medicare and Medicaid, education, the energy and the environment, the CDC is in here. So everything else combined is less than the Pentagon budget. Now, just to add to that a little bit, we look at the military budget. That's the Pentagon and nuclear weapons, which are part of the Department of Energy, actually, but very much part of the military. But we also look at what portion of the rest of the federal budget goes toward militarized government. And so if you include things like the Department of Homeland Security, Immigrations and Customs, which is ICE, and federal grants for policing, federal prisons, all of these things, you get another 10% of the federal budget that goes to militarized purposes. So all told, it's almost 2/3 of the discretionary budget that Congress allocates every year that goes to militarization. Now, finally, here's the Biden request. This came out just last Friday, and it has something different. So I'm going to start with the good before I get to the bad. The good is that for the first time in memory, it would call for less than 50% of the federal budget to go toward the military. Now it's just barely under 50%, but still, that's a shift that we haven't seen for some time, and it's something that we've talked about for quite a while, about how we have more than half of this discretionary budget that goes to the Pentagon. So at the outset, we know that the Biden budget would put ever so slightly more than half of the resources into all of those other things. Now, here are the specific ways that the Biden proposal, and again, it's just a proposal, it's not the budget, and the final budget won't look like this. But here are the specific ways that it differs from the budget that is current law that we have now. It calls for big increases in education, big increases in health and human services, but the third largest category of increase is still for the military. And I'll note that in this particular chart, we're just talking about the Department of Defense. So there's actually more military in the Department of Energy and other places that isn't reflected here because of the way that the Biden budget put the numbers out. But so you can see that the increase for the military is $11.3 billion over the value of last year. And I'll just compare that to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the right. That gold bar for the Department of State and International Aid is an increase of $6.8 billion. So they're giving a bigger increase to the Pentagon than they're giving to diplomacy and foreign aid. Now, that is a ratio of, for every $1 billion the State Department gets, the Pentagon would get $11.8 billion. And this is from an administration that is talking a good game about returning to democracy, to diplomacy, returning the United States to its position of leadership around the world. But this is still the picture. So Debbie talked a bit about the American Jobs Plan and the American Rescue Plan, which came before it. The American Jobs Plan has shown up in the media a lot as a $2 trillion plan. It's actually about 2.3 trillion. And that works out to about $280 billion a year because the plan would be spread over 8 years. So at $280 billion a year, the Pentagon request under the Biden budget is more than 2.5 times the annual spending proposed under the American Jobs Plan. And the last time the Pentagon budget was lower than $280 billion a year was in 1951. So we are spending every year several American Jobs Plans on the Pentagon. And we've been doing that since probably a lot of people on this call since, you know, before you were born or when you were very small children. And then another way of looking at it. So this is the proposed Pentagon increase on the left, and this does include nuclear weapons. So it's a slightly different number from what you saw before, but it's still the same concept. The proposed increase for the Pentagon in the Biden budget is $12.3 billion. And the entire proposed budget for the CDC is $8.7 billion. So they're proposing a bigger increase for the Pentagon than the entire budget of the CDC. And this is just a perfect example of how we're putting our resources into the wrong places to address the problems that we're really facing. I don't need to tell you what the pandemic has cost us all in terms of, you know, dollars and opportunities and experiences lost and lives lost. So this is a, you know, really tragic chart. So where does all of the Pentagon money go? For one thing, it goes to the 800 plus military installations that the United States has all around the world. Many of these, you'll see the biggest ones in Italy, Japan, Korea. Many of those are in places where the United States fought 20th century wars. And we are still there. We have never left. So this is particularly, to me, poignant this week as we talk about finally leaving Afghanistan, to realize that we have been in these other places since we got there in World War II, and we've never left. And so this is a major opportunity for the United States to pull back. And I'll just also note that while the United States has 800 military installations around the world, no other country has more than 20. Now, this is probably familiar, especially to folks who follow mass peace action, but the United States military budget is greater than the next 10 countries combined. And both of those on their own are greater than the entire rest of the world, which is 139 countries. So our military budget is massive. No other country comes close. And in particular, I'll point out China there in the middle in the red doesn't come anywhere close to our military spending. And yet they're becoming one of the primary justifications for increased military spending by the United States today. Now, here's another place where the dollars go. So this is the 2019 Department of Defense budget. It's actually probably gotten a little bit worse since then, but in 2019, 57% of the budget of the Department of Defense went to contractors, and only 43% stayed in the Department of Defense, and only a little over 20% went to the troops for pay and benefits. So the contractors are a key piece of this. And finally, there's a study that shows that this is related to all those bases I showed earlier, but also to United States naval presence and so many other things. The US spends an estimated at least $81 billion a year to protect global oil supplies, obviously making climate change much worse and adding on to the fact that the Pentagon is already one of the world's largest institutional fossil fuel emitters and emits more fossil fuels than many countries. Okay, so how do we get out of this? So this is a chart that shows the annual federal budget process. This is the process for discretionary spending. And what I really want to call your attention to is in the top right, at the very beginning of the flow chart, it goes from top to middle to bottom is the president's budget. So we're right at the beginning of this process, and we still have opportunities to change it this year. There are two major pieces of legislation that set the Pentagon budget. There's the National Defense Authorization Act and the Defense Appropriations process, and both of them provide opportunities to cut spending and change military policy. Now this year, I'm talking very short term now, because longer term we want to make many more cuts than this. But in the short term, in the next couple of years, the things that we want to focus on are to stop funding wars, to scale back nuclear weapons, and to say no to the contractors. So first, wars. And this week is really big because the US has decided to leave Afghanistan. So this, you would think, should provide some savings, right? Even the administration is talking about the fact that we've spent blood and treasure, and talking about how we need these resources for the American Jobs Plan and for other things. And yet, this is coming right on the heels of the budget that increases Pentagon spending. So they're clearly taking whatever savings come from pulling troops out of Afghanistan and putting it back into the military plus more. Now, this is a chart of the war on terror. These are all the countries where we have military bases that are engaged in the war on terror, counterterrorism training going on. We have military training. We have troops in combat in 14 countries. I challenge most of the people on this call to be able to name all of them. And we have drones and airstrikes in 7 countries. This chart is a couple of years old, but I'll just have you notice that it's way beyond the Middle East. We have tons of counterterrorism activity in Africa, in Asia, and it's really all over the world. So even while we're pulling out of Afghanistan, the war on terror is still raging. And finally, the China threat, which is being majorly inflated. I wouldn't even really categorize it as a threat, certainly not as a military threat to the United States. But it's forming the whole new basis for increased Pentagon spending. And next is nuclear weapons. Earlier this year, many of us celebrated when the UN treaty banning nuclear weapons went into effect. The US is not a signatory, but this is what we need to be working towards. In the shorter term, we need to stop the plans to develop new intercontinental ballistic missiles. Specifically, there's a program called the Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent that we can stop before it starts, which is a really important opportunity. There are a lot of these programs that have been going for long enough that they've got a lot of momentum. This is one where we still have an opportunity to stop it early on. And the contractors. So this is just the latest in a long series of debacles for the F-35 fighter jet, and probably my favorite, rivaled only by the time one of them caught fire just sitting on a runway. The F-35 a couple of weeks ago, this jet that's supposed to be the new big thing for the Pentagon, managed to shoot itself somehow. Like the same jet literally shot itself. It's hard to fathom, but it happened. So there are we don't need these things is the point. These are not for our security. They don't even work. And this is an ad that Lockheed Martin, the company responsible for the F-35, ran in some newspaper. And you'll know that they talked about security, which is of course the reason we're supposed to be doing this, but they also talk about jobs. And the problem with that is that investing in the military creates fewer jobs than investing the same dollars in almost anything else, including clean energy, infrastructure, healthcare, or education. All of those for the same investment create more good jobs than investing in the military and war. So where does all of that leave us? It leaves us at a place where the Biden administration put forth a budget proposal that is a real disappointment. does not live up to the standards that they're setting for themselves on domestic policy, where they're moving in a more progressive direction. That's not what's happening here. But we're making progress in Congress. We have 50 House Democrats who sent a letter to President Biden urging him to significantly slash the defense budget. We have, from last year, when there was a vote on a 10% cut on Pentagon spending, the support of not quite half, but getting close to half of the House Democrats, plus about close to half of the Senate Democrats, plus the support of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, which it was a bit of a surprise, and something that we hope that other senators will follow in his lead when we put forth similar cuts this year, which we will be doing. And so finally, just because we're talking about the full range of budget and all of the things that Debbie talked about in terms of human needs and what the American Rescue Plan does and what the American Jobs Plan does. So the 10% cut that we're calling for in the Pentagon budget could return to Massachusetts taxpayers $2.4 billion. Wow. And that amount of money could pay for 54,000 $15 an hour jobs with benefits, or 48,000 four-year full scholarships to a state university, or solar utility power for almost 6 million households. So there's so many better uses for that money and things that would really address our security. And I know I've run long, so this is my last slide. And if you want to come up with more things that our money could do for us by disinvesting in the Pentagon and investing in human needs, you can do that. We have a calculator at www.nationalpriorities.org. And I saw there are folks from some other states besides Massachusetts, which is great in this age of Zoom. And you can change it to your own state. So this one's showing New Mexico, but we have all of them. Thank you so much. I know I've run over time, so I will stop.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Definitely not the most uplifting, but extremely informative. I love the National Priorities Project website. It's so useful, and using it to calculate those trade-offs. As someone in New York, we were shocked and pleasantly surprised when Schumer supported the 10% cut. We really didn't think we would see the day, but hopefully he'll continue to do that, and we can push everyone all over to do the same. I know we are probably a little bit behind on time, but having really great conversation. So I'm going to turn it next to Alan Palm, who's director of 350 Mass Organizing's Better Future Project.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks all for having me. My name is Alan Breen Palm, and I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the director of organizing for 350 Mass, which is supported by the Better Future Project. 350 Mass is member-led, we're statewide, and we're grassroots, and we're organizing to address the climate crisis. And I also serve on the steering committee for a relatively new coalition called the Mass Renews Alliance that brings together labor unions, social and environmental justice groups, youth organizations, climate environmental groups to build power and push for policies that address the interlocking crises of climate change, racial and economic injustice by addressing the basic needs of people right now. And so I'm really grateful to Mass Peace Action for inviting me to speak with you all. I'm glad to be in a setting and amongst folks who recognize the grave injustice of endless war. And the connections between war and climate change are profound and, in my view, largely unrecognized. As Lindsay just referenced, the US Department of Defense is the world's largest institutional user of petroleum and the single largest producer of greenhouse gases in the world, and has been mostly left out of even accounting from international climate agreements, non-binding though they are. And so we will not stabilize the climate while continuing endless wars. The United States is also the largest historical emitter of greenhouse gases and has played a role in obstructing any internationally binding agreements for many decades. And it is with that context, like a relatively low bar on climate action, that I'm going to give some remarks about the Biden administration's climate plans. And so we have seen parts of the Build Back Better plan manifest through executive orders in January. So significantly, the executive orders from the Biden administration in January called for the US to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. They canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. They created several new positions. One focused on climate on the National Security Council, held by John Kerry. One within the White House offices, held by Gina McCarthy. It added some significant steps to enforce environmental justice protections. So those are provisions for communities who have borne the historical and present disproportionate burden of pollution, and that consistently tracks along lines of race and class for bearing that disproportionate burden. And they reinstated a number of Obama-era regulations, as well as other important steps. But I want to focus on the more recent actions that have been referenced earlier by the Biden administration's introduction of the American Jobs Plan. That calls for the 2.3 trillion over 8 years, or 2.7 trillion over 10 years, to be invested in jobs and infrastructure. And again, we do anticipate another bill from the Biden administration, probably the Americans Families Plan, coming really soon. So I'm going to get into some of the specifics of the American Jobs Plan, but here's the takeaway, is that 2.7 trillion over 10 years is not nearly enough to address the crises we face. For some context, the recent stimulus package, the American Rescue Plan, is 1.9 trillion over just 1 year. According to the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have fewer than 10 years to make significant reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the runaway greenhouse effects that will make stabilizing the climate nearly impossible if we don't make significant global greenhouse gas reductions in the next 10 years. And so with that context, the American Jobs Plan includes only I'll talk about some of the other categories, but starting with housing. And most homes in the United States, as well as here in Massachusetts, are powered by and heated by burning oil or gas on site, right? And most of them are older and leaky, so we need to fix our homes as part of addressing climate change. The American Jobs Plan includes upgrading only 2 million of the 140 million housing units in the United States over the next 10 years. Just 2 million of the 140 million housing units. For some comparison, the coalition that I referenced earlier, the Master News Alliance, has introduced state policy in Massachusetts that proposes to retrofit 1 million homes in Massachusetts alone over the next 10 years, which is not radical. It is actually in fulfillment of our state's existing laws. There are existing climate laws. So it is necessary to meet the goals that we already have. And that's kind of a consistent pattern, is that there are, both on the state level and the federal level, is that there are these spoken and even written commitments to significant goals, but there are under-resourced plans in order to meet them. So the American Jobs Act it's not bad. It does many good and important things. It calls for replacing all the lead pipes across the United States. It references the PRO Act, which contains really important and strong labor protections. Deborah Weinstein earlier, to start off the call, spoke to many of the good and important things about the American Jobs Plan. It is just on its own not a serious answer to the existential threats that we face. However, as Rep. Presley would remind us, it is our job as activists, as organizers and movement builders, to expand the realm of the possible. So what does the expanded realm of the possible look like on the level of a federal recovery plan? Well, it is called the Thrive Agenda. So some of you all may have heard of this. So Thrive is an acronym that stands for Transform, Invest, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy. And it is a plan to invest 10 trillion over the next 10 years in jobs and infrastructure, with at least 50% of that investment going towards frontline communities. So I'm going to do a quick comparison. It would probably have been beneficial for me to have created slides for this, but I didn't. So here we go. So the American Jobs Plan would create about 5 million jobs over the next 10 years. And given that there are 15 million people out of work in the United States, the Biden administration's plan would leave 2 out of the 3 currently unemployed people jobless. The Thrive Act, by comparison, would create 15 million jobs. We'll look at some of the other sectors. So in regard to energy, the American Jobs Plan invests $469 billion, and this is 17% of what the Thrive plans would invest in clean energy, leaving a gap of about 2.6 million jobs. And that's largely due to low investments in the electric grid and low investments in expanding renewable energy in the American Jobs Plan in comparison to the Thrive Act. In transportation, the American Jobs Plan invests $621 billion. That is 32% of what the Thrive Act would invest, leaving a jobs gap of about 1.9 million due to low investments in surface transportation and electric vehicles and rail. In buildings, the American Jobs Plan invests about $378 billion. This is 40% of the Thrive amount, and even the Thrive amount is not adequate. But that difference, the 40% difference between the American Jobs Plan and the Thrive Act equates to about 785,000 jobs. To go through a couple other categories, in land, the American Jobs Plan invests $31 billion. This is 12% of what is represented in the Thrive Act, leaving an annual gap of $22 billion and nearly 350,000 jobs over the course of the next decade. And these are due to low investments and plugging orphaned oil and gas wells and brownfield and Superfund cleanup. In agriculture, the American Jobs Plan has virtually no investments in agriculture. A couple of the sectors that are a little closer between the American Jobs Plan and Thrive are in water. And so the American Jobs Plan invests $111 billion in water. This is 34% of what is in the Thrive Act, leaving a gap of about 270,000 jobs. The American Jobs Plan invests $100 billion in broadband. This is 29% of the Thrive amount, leaving a gap of 225,000 jobs. And finally, for my list, which is not exhaustive, the American Jobs Plan invests $400 billion in care, which is great, but it is only 52% of what is in the Thrive Act, leaving a gap over the decade of 785,000 jobs. So the takeaway to this is that the American Jobs Plan is good. It does some important things, but we need to push and expand the realm of what is possible right now. The Thrive Act represents a lot of what that expanded vision could be. It is rooted in frontline leadership from Indigenous communities, environmental justice groups, labor unions, and many others. It would create 15 million jobs. These are good family-sustaining jobs over the next decade, and it would cut climate pollution in half by 2030. So that is it for my presentation, but I would leave you all with the ask to please contact your congressperson soon, next week, and ask them to co-sponsor the Thrive Act. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan, for laying out the flaws in a lot of these current plans and how they don't even come close to addressing what we need them to. So a lot of work to be done, and I'm glad that you've given us something to do, which is to contact our reps about the Thrive Act. I know we are running a little bit behind schedule still, so I'm going to ask Jonathan to be as quick as possible. But next we've got Jonathan King to talk a little bit about biomedical research.
It hasn't been easy to understand how in one of the richest and scientifically advanced countries on earth, we were totally unprepared to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Part of the answer lies in the absence of a coherent national health system, right? We spend hundreds of billions of dollars on Medicare, Medicaid, private health insurance, hospital budgets, but those funds and those programs go for people who are already sick and already ill. And they don't do anything to advance diagnosis, prevention, understanding the mechanism of the disease, the origin of it, etiological agents, developing vaccines, therapies. All of those depend on biomedical research, which in the United States, as I said, is not financed by any of the big health insurance programs, but it's financed by the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, whose budgets are voted each year as part of the congressional discretionary budget. And these agencies distribute our tax dollars to investigators in colleges and universities and in medical schools across the nation. And in those institutions, primarily younger and lower paid graduate students and postdocs and technicians labor long hours 24/7 to try to unveil the actual roots of disease. And it's these programs that are responsible for figuring out how to prevent and treat heart disease, stroke, cancer, arthritis, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, infectious diseases like flu and coronavirus. Now, it was because of the decades of public investment in basic biomedical research that we know the structure of the coronavirus, and we know about the spike protein, and the Chinese scientists were able to very quickly determine the nucleotide sequence of the RNA. And it was all those investments that led to the situation where very quickly we now have significant vaccines. And of course, direct federal subsidy for the vaccine makers, but that would have been worth nothing if we hadn't had the basic knowledge about coronavirus and the coronavirus sequence. Nonetheless, those programs had been underfunded for decades. For example, the first coronavirus outbreak, 2003 SARS-CoV-1 outbreak in Asia, that killed thousands of people. It was very well understood. And we could have launched on a program of developing vaccines for it. But those programs were explicitly cut by the US administration. And as a result, when COVID-2 appeared, we weren't ready for it. So that was the outcome of failure to invest in understanding health and disease. Now, sadly, it's the poorest and lowest wealth among us who are hit hardest by these ailments and who are unable to afford, the extra care and full-time care that might alleviate things. Now, here is one of Lindsay's excellent slides. This year was 2017. It was 668 billion for the military. The NIH budgets and the NSF budgets are so small, they're not even broken out in the pie chart. The NIH is buried in Health and Human Services, NSF in Commerce. The NIH that year was about 4% of the budget. So that's the research dealing with all the ills that afflict our population: cancer, stroke, arthritis, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, antibiotic-resistant infections, right? 4% of the budget. Well, with the onset of the pandemic and the loss of life from the pandemic, more than 500,000 Americans, Congress finally recognized the need to beef up biomedical research. The CARES Act, passed last summer, directed about $1 billion to the NIH, $4.5 billion to the Centers for Disease Control, $3.5 billion to what's called the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. That has to do with manufacturing vaccines. Well, this aid, it was a step forward responding to the coronavirus after years of inadequate budgets. But a month later, after voting a few billion for the response to the coronavirus, they voted $738 billion for the Pentagon, as Lindsay has showed you, 800 military bases around the world, dangerous new nuclear weapons, and half of which went to large corporations, a few of whom I list here. They are the ones who are eating up our income taxes, and they are the ones who are really financing the claim that, oh, China is a threat, North Korea is a threat, Iran's a threat, Russia's a threat. They don't care whether it's actually a threat. They need a justification for continuing to have the government send them billions of our tax dollars. The profits are guaranteed. It's monopoly contracts because you can't outsource to the Chinese. And so they fiercely protect these contracts because they could never compete in the civilian market. And so we have the military industrial complex that Eisenhower so many years ago said was a threat to American democracy. Now, I just want to, just as one concrete examples, if individual Ohio-class submarine were its own country, it would be the 6th most heavily armed nuclear weapons nation. The U.S. has 14 Ohio-class subs. Each of them, can fire off more than, some can fire off as many as 24 missiles, and then each missile has a set of independently targeted warheads. So one submarine firing their missiles can obliterate all the major cities of any country on earth, China, India, Russia, etc. And it might happen by accident, in which case we are all done. You'd think that 14 of these submarines would be enough. No, the administration is proposing to buy a dozen more at about $8 billion each. Well, if instead of buying 12, we only bought 6, we could double the budget of the NIH. Now, everybody here knows that the fiercest megaton ICBM or nuclear submarine is totally helpless against the coronavirus. We are not being attacked by Russians. We're not being attacked by Iranians. We're not being attacked by the Chinese. We're being attacked by the coronavirus, right? And what we need to do is shift these funds. Now, the current bill, it's good. It's good. Gives a few billion more to the NIH, and an additional 5 or 6 billion for kind of an additional agency on the healthcare front. But it's still peanuts compared to, for example, Alzheimer's. 3 million Americans suffer every year from Alzheimer's. Costs Medicaid $250 billion. That's the actual cost of the economy. And the NIH spends about $1 billion a year. A problem that's costing us $250 billion and enormous human suffering. The research budget just for Alzheimer ought to be $25 billion, not 1 or 2 or 3 billion. Now, I just want to close. One of the things I think we need to change things is, I go around and give talks about this stuff. And when I show Lindsay's slide and I say more than half our income taxes go to the military, people say, "Oh, I don't believe that. That can't be true." I'm a professor of political science. I never heard that. And people do not know. They don't know that half their income taxes the checks they write to the government go to weapons. And they tend not to believe it when they hear it. And the reason is, in all the 100 years that the United States government has collected income taxes, no agency of the government has ever reported back to the taxpayers how those dollars are spent. You got to find Lindsay and the National Priorities Project to find that information. It is not, it's buried deep in federal government files. So one little step that we're taking here in Massachusetts, we have a bill which we've filed it 2 years ago, filing it again this year, called Taxpayers' Right to Know. And it simply says that the state, it's legislation that instructs the state administration to report to taxpayers how the state government and the US Congress spent their tax dollars in the prior year. Nothing radical. In Cambridge, twice a year, we get a report from the city manager. How are our property taxes spent? How much to fire? How much to police? How much to schools? Now, there's a lot of political resistance to this because the Northrop Grummans of the world know that if people knew how much of their tax dollars was going to pay the CEOs of Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, there'd be a fight back. So this is something you can do in your state. We hope to promote it in other states. At that, thanks a lot. Sorry if I if I went, well, obviously there are, we've heard about the Thrive budget. The Poor People's Campaign has a moral budget. We may hear about it from Shali. And the Congressional Progressive Caucus has a people's agenda that's also very good. And the stimulus proposal has a lot of good stuff. So thanks for giving me the time.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. Next up, our next speaker is actually going to be joining us with a pre-recorded video. Shali Gupta Barnes, who's program director of the Cairo Center and the co-author of the moral budget of the Poor People's Campaign. Can't join us live, but has sent us a video. As a disclaimer now, the video freezes, the audio doesn't. So if you are not seeing the video move, it is not you, it's the video, but such is technology these days. So I hope you'll continue to pay close attention to what is being said, even if you cannot see Shali moving.
Hello, everyone, and thanks to all who organized this event today, and to the other speakers and panelists and colleagues who we are marching together with towards this in this long haul to seeing the kind of society we know is possible. My name is Shali Gupta Barnes. I'm the policy director for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. We have now organized this campaign across 45 states to change the narrative on these 5 interlocking injustices of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the false narrative of Christian nationalism. And we've organized this campaign by prioritizing the 140 million poor and low-income people who live at the center of these injustices every day. And we've organized it to build the power of those 140 million people coming together across all lines of division: race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, faith, issue, geography, to unleash a new and unsettling force in this nation. And these are times, in fact, when such a force is necessary. As we saw the first weeks of 2021, we are in the depths of multiple crises that require a new paradigm shift. We have a political crisis, as we saw on January 6th, an economic crisis that continues to unfold, a health crisis that continues to claim thousands of lives every month. And we know that this didn't begin with the pandemic. This is the effect of deep inequities that have taken root in our economic and political systems, and have impacted the lives of at least 140 million people every day. And of course, we have seen improvements this year. The American Rescue Plan began to move us in a new direction. It put poverty on the national agenda in a new way for the first time in at least 25 years, creating an opening for the kinds of bold policies that we've been pushing for a very long time, around a guaranteed income, around healthcare and housing and more. We're seeing finally people are receiving this vaccine and able to see the signs of, the sign of overcoming the pandemic and crisis we've been in for the past year. And we heard this week that at least one forever war will be ending in Afghanistan. These are significant changes from the kinds of policies and priorities that we've been facing for the past decades, and against which the Poor People's Campaign and so many others have been organizing for years. And yet, at the same time, we must also recognize that these are but steps along the way. They are significant steps, but we have still so far yet to go. And we must see that gap as clearly as we do the opportunities that are being taken right now. In the middle of this Derek Chauvin trial in Minnesota, there was yet another police killing. Even with the announcement around Afghanistan, we know the Pentagon budget is in fact higher than it has been in previous years. The cruelty of our immigration system persists. Indigenous sacred lands remain threatened. Our low-wage workers, who are predominantly women and people of color, are still working for poverty wages, without benefits, without paid leave, without health care, and without the protections of unions. We still have this avalanche of evictions and foreclosures and hunger that we have not fully grasped as a nation, and that is, steadily building steam and coming our way. Some estimates even show that the 140 million increased to 150 million, even with the relief payments and expansions in SNAP and unemployment insurance. And we're seeing now, after the November elections, that our democracy is under a new wave of attacks. There have been hundreds of voter suppression bills introduced in more than 40 states. Anti-protest bills are being introduced in dozens of states that are making it difficult and criminal to exercise our fundamental constitutional rights to demand a better and more accountable government. This is the context that we must look at when we assess any gains that have been made so far, as well as any proposals that are being made at this time. And in fact, we have to measure these gaps that remain because there is still such a great need to do more. This is not just to be critical, but to offer a perspective around which we can, in fact, build this country back better than it was, maybe better than it ever has been. This begins in our analysis with prioritizing the 140 million poor and low-income people in everything we're doing, in all of our policies, in all of our programs, in the relationships we develop and maintain and build and organize around, and even how we understand our place and time in this moment of US and world history. We live in a time of unprecedented abundance and productive capacity, yet have not been able to move that in the direction of meeting all of our needs. There is something fundamentally wrong with that. It speaks to the profound spiritual death that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King referenced in 1967, but also to what we believe that our economy and society must be organized around and who must benefit from it. In fact, we have to understand that prioritizing the 140 million is not a question of charity, but a question of survival. Because unless the poor and low-income people in our society are provided for, we are moving in the direction of greater inequality, greater climate crisis, greater threats against our people and our planet. In fact, this approach to this idea of centering the 140 million is not only the right thing to do, it is also good economics, lifting from the bottom rather than waiting for wealth to trickle down. This has been confirmed in recently through this report from the London School of Economics that in fact looked at trickle-down tax policies over the past 5 decades and found while these policies consistently benefit the wealthy, they have had no meaningful effect on unemployment or economic growth. We saw this, in fact, in the 2017 tax cuts with the Trump administration. These tax cuts that were given to corporations were immediately translated over into nearly $1 trillion in stock buybacks. These corporations basically gave that money back to themselves. We have to compare that kind of economics with the fact that every dollar that goes into a low-wage worker's pocket grows our economy. It gets multiplied into more than that dollar. We see this, in fact, with many kinds of income and economic supports that go directly to poor and low-income people. A report from the Brookings Institute showed that the COVID policies that had the greatest impact on GDP were those that went to financially vulnerable households. So really lifting from the bottom is an economic theory that can benefit us all, that can fundamentally transform our economy. Now, what would this look like? These days we're hearing more and more about this $2 trillion infrastructure plan. Well, if we were prioritizing the 140 million in our infrastructure, it would look like transportation infrastructure that not only ensures that we can get to where we're going safely, but that the things the 140 million people who are poor and low income need can get to these communities. It would mean water service and sanitation delivery. It would mean access to healthful foods. It would also mean keeping things out of our communities that harm them, like pollutants and fossil fuel industries and military bases and prisons. It would mean greening our economy, beginning with those communities that are first and worst impacted by climate change. This would look like housing infrastructure that ends homelessness, and community infrastructure that ensures that we not only have quality public schools that meet our children's needs during school, but also after school, in libraries and recreation centers, and the kind of 21st century communications technology that is available but must be accessible to all. It would look like care infrastructure from childhood to our twilight years. It would look like public health infrastructure that actually provides for our health and not just in a pandemic. It would look like a jobs infrastructure that provides opportunities for us to thrive and not just barely survive. Of course, this would mean shifting our priorities away from war and weapons we don't need and fossil fuels and mass incarceration, and instead investing the abundance that we do have to build up vibrant communities where we can build our economy, where we can thrive no matter where we're born, what color our skin, who we love, or who we want to be in this world. This is what we're organizing for in the Poor People's Campaign, and with the people on this call, and with so many more. And given the moment we're in, this is exactly the orientation we need to build this country up and usher in a period of economic, political, social, spiritual, and moral revival. We've seen some early signs of this. It is now on us to push this opening, to bend that arc of history towards justice, and create a whole new paradigm. As we say in the Poor People's Campaign, now is the time that we must move forward together and not one step back. Thank you.
Great. That was a wonderful message from Shali Gupta Barnes. I wish she was here to join in person, but really glad that she could send in that video. As you've probably noticed, we're running a little bit over time. And I noticed that both Deborah and Alan had to leave already. So we're behind on a couple of our speakers, and I don't think we'll have time for Q&A, but I've noticed some really great conversation happening in the chat. I know Lindsay's still here with us. I'm not sure, Lindsay, if you have any final words before I give some announcements and close us out for this evening.
Not at all. Go for it, Emily. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thanks so much, Lindsay. Yeah, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. Tonight's event was not just the Massachusetts Peace Action event. It was co-sponsored by a bunch of wonderful groups. Massachusetts Alliance of Housing and Urban Development Tenants, Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, which I'm on the board of, New England War Tax Resistance, American Friends Service Committees, Northeast Region, Peace Action Maine, Peace Action New York State, Chicago Area Peace Action, Code Pink Women for Peace, Veterans for Peace, Maine, Maryland United for Peace and Justice, Boston College Democrats, Walpole Peace and Justice Group, and 350 Massachusetts. So thank you to all of those groups. It is really wonderful to be working in community with all of you. It's been a really wonderful night talking about all of the different ways that we can take action on the budget issue and make it something that really reflects our priorities and our morals. And I know that, again, this was just one of 2 tax days this year. So today was our traditional tax day, and I know more events, some in person, are coming up on the May 17th tax day deadline, including a demonstration in New York City. I know there's also an event being planned up at Massachusetts. If Cole or someone else wants to talk about that.
Yeah, let me just put it up. So the real tax day is May 17th, Monday, May 17th. And we will rally at one of the federal buildings in Boston. It's called the Tip O'Neill Federal Building. It's not the JFK, it's a few blocks away from there, but there's actually a lot of federal workers that work in the Tip O'Neill Federal Building. So we're gonna go there at noon on Monday, May 17th. So please join us there if you're in Eastern Mass or close enough to Boston to get there. We got some great speakers already lined up, and we're adding more, but we've got Savina Martin from the Poor People's Campaign, Steve Tolman, President of the Mass AFL-CIO, Erica Udenhoven, the new state rep from Somerville, Harris Grumman, Executive Director of the SEIU State Council, Nick Rabb of Sunrise Boston, Mary Regan of the New England War Tax Resistance, and Chuck Collins for the Institute of Policy Studies. So that should be a great event, and it will be a in-person event, socially distanced and masked. But it's time to get out on the streets and make our voices heard. Hope you can join us there. Groups are holding tax day events across the country and across the world. There's actually a global day of action against military spending, which has a whole map of actions. I'm not sure how quick this will come up, but And so, check back for, if you're in a different state or area, check back for information about where your best event is. But this is the Global Day of Action, and as you can see, they have actions. It's late April, early May in a variety of countries and cities. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Cole. On that note, there's also a Global Days Against Military Spending appeal that you can sign. I'll put it in the chat. But this is a great website overall to look at all of the events. And yeah, lots of ways to take action. The Global Days Against Military Spending or Global Days of Action on Military Spending were extended this year to include our new tax day. So we've got a lot of events happening all over the world. I know April 26th will be another big day. That's when the SIPRI report is supposed to be released. So stay tuned for more ways to take action. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight.